Walk into any industry today and you're going to see two very distinct groups of people. One group is frantically busy building their brand, and the other, well, they're quietly busy building their skill. One is highly visible, the other is highly capable. But here's the brutal truth of the modern professional world. You are either building your brand or you're building your skill, and getting that sequence wrong is a fatal career mistake. If you reverse the order, you end up spending years building a reputation for things you can't actually do. So today, in this explainer, we're breaking down why the absolute only way to build a career that actually holds together is to build the skill first and let the brand follow.
Okay, let's dive into this and look at the actual structure of a career. Think of your career in a true 3D style, literally like a physical piece of architecture. Building a brand first without the underlying competence, that is just constructing a massive 2D facade. It's a flat, paper-thin billboard. Sure, it looks incredibly impressive from the street, but there's absolutely zero depth behind it. Skill building, on the other hand, is the unglamorous work of pouring a deep, monumental, three-dimensional foundation. It takes way longer, and yeah, it doesn't look like much from the outside at first, but it is the only structure capable of holding genuine weight over time.
And this brings us to a pretty devastating reality for the brand-first crowd. Every single hour you spend chasing visibility before your underlying skills in place is an hour stolen directly from your actual skill development. You are literally trading that 3D foundation for a 2D facade. Now, in the short term, that trade feels entirely reasonable, right? Because the facade is immediately visible. It looks impressive to everyone around you. But the cost of that trade is massive, and it's going to show up years later when that flimsy facade is finally asked to support some real weight.
Now look, if you've been prioritizing your brand lately, I want to remove the shame right here and now. You are not making this mistake because you aren't smart. You're just falling into what we call the dopamine trap. Our brains are evolutionarily calibrated to crave fast, immediate feedback loops. Think about it. When you post online or speak on a panel or do a bunch of networking, you get immediate visibility signals, likes, followers, invitations. The dopamine literally arrives daily. And let's be honest with ourselves, we all love watching that notification counter go up. Your brain pulls you toward these immediate rewards, tricking you into feeling like you're making real progress, when in reality, you're just collecting signals with no underlying substance.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core conflict here. Brand work is intoxicating. It's public, it provides incredibly fast feedback, and it is just rich in dopamine. Skill work, though, it's the exact opposite. The feedback loop is agonizingly slow. The progress is completely private, the improvements are painfully incremental, and there is absolutely zero audience clapping for you. It's just you, alone, doing the unglamorous work of getting better for months, sometimes years at a time. So it's pretty easy to see why ambitious people postpone the skill work indefinitely.
But here is exactly why you cannot afford to postpone it. The years between 25 and 45 are your prime skill development decades. These are the specific life stages where you have maximum brain plasticity, the time, and the baseline energy required for intense, deliberate practice. If you spend these irreplaceable years chasing a 2D billboard instead of building your 3D capability, you can't just get them back. You can't just snap your fingers and redo this foundational development later in life.
To understand how this actually plays out in the real world, let's look at the story of the quiet builder. This is a case study of a woman in her late 20s who entered a highly competitive industry. Like everyone else, she faced a choice. Jump on the fast dopamine escalator of getting on panels and growing her presence, or take the steep, rocky stairs to deepen her actual craft. While all her peers chose the easy visibility of the escalator, she deliberately chose to endure the slow, quiet, excruciating path of deep craft.
Let's move along and see how this strategy compounds across a crucial 5-year timeline. Year 1, it was agonizing. She was invisible, doubting herself while her peers raced ahead collecting followers. But she stayed the course. By year 4, a noticeable 3D skill gap emerged. She could simply do things her peers couldn't. And then, year 5 triggered a massive reversal. The real, consequential opportunities, the ones that required actual competence, they stopped going to her highly visible peers and started flowing entirely to her. By year 10, because her deep skill was just undeniable, she was an untouchable industry name.
This right here reveals one of the most powerful secrets in any industry. The work is the brand. Let that sink in for a second. You don't actually have to market hard if your 3D capability is genuinely better than the work around you. True skill speaks for itself. It generates its own marketing naturally through word of mouth, referrals, and undeniable results. It completely bypasses the exhausting need for constant self-promotion because the substance does all the heavy lifting for you.
But what happens to the people who chose the other path? Well, this brings us to a pretty stark warning. the mid-career collapse. For the brand-first crowd, a brand without underlying substance has a shelf life. It's a fragile 2D structure. Eventually the industry shifts, a platform changes, or the angle just gets stale. And because there is no 3D foundation holding the brand up, that flat facade physically cannot withstand the industry winds, and it inevitably blows over and fails.
Let's break down the exact anatomy of this structural collapse, step by step. Step 1. The individual is finally called upon to deliver real, high-stakes work based on their marketing. Step 2. Their brand makes an implicit promise of expertise, and that promise is forcefully checked against their actual substance by people who genuinely know the difference. And Step 3. The empty gap between their marketed expertise and their real capability is permanently exposed. The 2D facade completely crumbles.
And the real tragedy is, this structural collapse usually hits hardest right around age 40. This is when the visibility you built in your 20s and 30s actually starts to work against you. You're left quietly stuck. You might have some name recognition, sure, but you are consistently passed over for the most consequential work. And honestly, even worse, you are internally exhausted from the daily performance of maintaining an image that you secretly know lacks substance.
You just can't fake skill forever. The faking has an absolute expiration date, and trying to rebuild an actual foundation at age 45 while juggling mortgages, families, and massive adult responsibilities is exponentially harder than doing it when you were 30. The cost of running the order backward is paying for a huge mistake when you are least equipped to afford it.
So the crucial point is, when you zoom out to a 20-year timeline, the contrast is staggering. At year 3, the brand-first approach looks like it's winning, even though it requires constant maintenance. But by year 10, the quiet, 3D foundation of the skill-first builder starts paying massive, exponential returns. By year 20, the hollow brand has entirely faded out, completely exhausted by shifting trends, while the deep skill compounds infinitely, creating a career that practically runs itself.
The difference really boils down to exhausting constant maintenance versus deepening relationships. The brand-first individual is trapped on a treadmill, desperately finding new angles, new platforms, and jumping on new trends just to maintain that same level of hollow visibility. Honestly, it's exhausting. Meanwhile, the skill-first builder's work keeps producing on its own. Just look around. The people you respect the absolute most in your field, the names that persist across decades of changing technology, they are almost exclusively the ones who built the deep skill first.
So, what does this actually look like for you, starting tomorrow? Well, here is the deep skill blueprint. It requires prioritizing deliberate practice every single day. It means seeking out the hardest projects at the very edge of your current capability. It demands real, unfiltered feedback. And notice, it doesn't mean zero visibility. It just means moderate, proportionate visibility that never outpaces your actual competence. It is an unglamorous, daily grind. In your early career, we're talking especially your 20s and 30s, your time and energy require a strict ratio. 80% must be poured into that deep 3D skill foundation. Only 20% should go toward visibility. You definitely don't have to be totally invisible to the world, but you absolutely must aggressively invert the cultural pressure that screams at you to market yourself constantly. Now, what's really interesting here is what happens as you mature in your career. Even when you're established and the real work is flowing in, that ratio only shifts slightly to 70% skill development and 30% visibility. The sequence never flips. The time allocation never gives in to that brand-first obsession that traps so many ambitious people. The foundation must always be actively maintained and deepened. This sequence is not a suggestion. It's the fundamental law of professional architecture. Build the foundation deep, and the building above it can rise as tall as you want. Skill first, brand second. That order is simply not negotiable if you want a career that holds together when the wind blows and the industry shifts. You have got to build the 3D capability before you paint the 2D facade.
So I want to leave you with a choice that you have to make starting tomorrow morning. Look at the path you're currently on. In 20 years, will your career be compounding effortlessly on a massive, deep 3D foundation? Or will you be standing behind a crumbling facade, totally exhausted, wondering why the real work finally stopped coming? The choice is entirely yours. Thanks for joining this explainer. Now, go build the skill.